this side of the room because it will be easier to see the screen. Donc c'est plus simple de s'asseoir de ce côté-là puisque vous verrez mieux l'écran. Sinon vous verrez rien. And also I wanted to mention once again not to go here at the back of the room because we have 2 translators and they have all their things, equipment and everything there. So please avoid going from the back of the room. Donc s'il vous plaît, passez pas par derrière puisqu'il y a les 2 traductrices qui ont tout leur équipement et c'est compliqué et ça les perturbe si on passe par derrière. Donc passez par les rangées. Okay, we'll start again. So the moderator of the first afternoon session is Robson Tigona, who is a lecturer at the National University of Vanuatu in environmental science. And we're going to have 3 presentations, and then a short break. We're running a bit late, and then 4 presentations. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, hello everyone. I think we should start the session because we are running out of time. So for those who are outside, can you make your way in? And we'll start straight away. Here we have Dr. Stuart Bedford. He's a lecturer at the National University of Australia, and he will be presenting on the looking to the past for resilience into the future, the security of traditional gardening systems. So without further ado, Dr. Stuart, you can start your presentation now.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. As Leslie said, if you really want to make the most of this presentation, please shift over to this side of the auditorium because you probably won't see it very well otherwise. Okay, looking to the past for resilience into the future, the security of traditional gardening systems. Please note that I've also added the names of 2 close colleagues on this presentation, Patricia Simeone and Vincent Lebeau, who have been instrumental in generating some of the data that will be presented here. The double cyclones Judy and Kevin that struck central and southern Vanuatu in March 2023 seem to further highlight for some the increased vulnerability of Vanuatu and its citizens in a changing climate. Much more foreign aid has been regularly demanded to help compensate for this. Yet the contemporary challenges of climate change are rarely considered in any deep historical perspective. The first people settled across Vanuatu some 3,000 years ago, and over 3 millennia developed a multitude of survival strategies to cope with a range of natural hazards that sustained a vastly larger population than exists today. Traditional gardening systems were a key. As the population today shifts away from such systems, often towards increased urbanisation, commercial farming and reliance on imported foods, particularly rice and flour, vulnerability will naturally be the consequence. This presentation highlights traditional gardening systems on Awhate Island that sustained a much larger population that was disrupted following the introduction of European diseases in the 19th century, This aspect I cannot emphasize enough, the depopulation, along with its associated impacts. Reliable calculations of population loss on some islands in the first generation in the mid-19th century following introduced diseases was 90%. Massive depopulation is rarely figured into contemporary discussions of sustainability or food security. Support for traditional agricultural systems across the region then is vital for food security for the region into the future. Many of the staple crops that we associate with farming today, traditional agriculture, appear to have been brought to the islands by the first colonisers. Introduced domestic plants associated with the Lapita period have been identified at a number of sites through the analysis of plant microfossil remains from soil samples and dental calculus, providing direct evidence for the introduction of yam, taro and banana, for example. However, as you all know, these crops were adapted to very different island environments over time, with increasing emphasis on particular crops and their intensification on different islands, particularly developing over the last 1,000 years. Some of these cropping systems are extraordinarily productive and resistant to drought and cyclones. For example, irrigated taro systems, as found across Anitium, Maivo, Santo and South Pentecost, are considered some of the most productive gardening systems on record anywhere on the planet. Okay, here I focus on Awhate and the remnant agricultural systems found across the island that indicate a total transformation of the island landscape from the coast to the high interior, heavily modified over millennia by human activity, predating European contact and mostly associated with agricultural production. This data has been primarily generated through LiDAR, or airborne light detection and ranging. It is a remote sensing method that uses light in the form of a pulsed laser to measure variable distances to the Earth's surfaces and produces a finely detailed record of the Earth's surface. Foliage can be removed so you simply have the ground surface visible. The LiDAR here was generated in 2013 through the Australian Government's International Climate Change Adaptation Initiative. In Vanuatu, 3 islands were targeted, namely Santo on the south and east coast, Malakula east coast, and Awhate, the north, west and south coasts. These areas surveyed were largely restricted to low-lying areas, which were identified as heavily populated, important economic zones that may be impacted in the future by sea level rise. Okay, the map you can see here, Awhate, showed the white area shows the area that was surveyed by LiDAR, some 307 square kilometres, or 34% of the island. You can see the surveyed areas include the north, northwest and northeast of the island, covering about 48 kilometres of the coastline between Mangaliu and Epau on the northeast. The width of the area surveyed from the coast to the interior varied between 2 and 4 kilometres. The other major coverage was the south and southwest of the island, comprising some 65 kilometres of coastline between Devil's Point in the west and Enam in the east. Here the survey width varied from 2 to 8 kilometres. A single strip, you can see joining the 2 larger areas, was flown 4 kilometres long by 450 metres wide, which joined these 2 zones. This is the only zone where the LiDAR data is available across an elevated interior area of the island up to 300 metres. The east and the centre of the island has not been surveyed. Map info software was used to generate and georeference the LiDAR data and then to analyse the remains identified, both calculating the extent of the areas modified and the scale and dimensions of the various features. The calculation of the surface area was made incorporating only features that were visible and had survived more modern development. The calculations are very conservative, not including features that were indistinct or only partly visible in amongst recent intensive peri-urban settlement, current and former airports, and areas of pasture that had been cleared by mechanical machinery. Okay, so this essentially identifies the areas of modification. As I say, the estimates are very conservative, and modification is found across very distinctive zones. In summary, there are 46 square kilometres of modified areas on various plateaus. That's the orange-brown and light brown coloured areas. In the river valleys, Teuma, Mele, Marona and Undine, a total of 14 square kilometres has been modified. That's the areas shown in green. However, it must be emphasised that two of those valleys, Teuma and Mele, have been highly modified by historic and more modern activities. There were also, what shocked us all, 71 circular features, massive circular features, identified across the zone of survey. Those are shown on the map as black dots. These are unique and previously unidentified features to which I will return later. Now, all of you know this scene. This is Bayerfield International Airport. It's obviously significant disturbance to the landscape can be seen with airport construction and the Vladimir estate, but remnant garden systems are also in evidence at the eastern end of the airport. You can see those linear networked features. This is the Marona Valley and surrounding plateaus. Don't know how clear that is, but it's quite spectacular, the modification that has gone on the Marona Valley. Extensive linear mounds identified in the valley are associated with gardening. The elevated mounds provided extensive zones that were immune to the regular flooding of the valley systems. There are higher and wider mounds, up to 2.5 metres high and 4 metres wide. That's the purple on the map, on the right. And they run for some 25 kilometres across the valley floor. The lower linear mounds, up to 1 metre high and 2 metres wide, are laid out in an irregular mosaic pattern, primarily enclosing areas of varying size. They're coloured light blue on the map, and they run for some 32 kilometres in the valley. A third type of linear mound can be seen on the surrounding plateau, coloured black, again in the map on the right-hand side, just in the far corner. These are enclosing irregular grid patterns, enclosing smaller areas, and are generally no more than 30 metres high and distributed all across elevated terraces. They would appear to represent garden boundaries. You'll also note that there's two large circular features in red in the valley. Those are two of those circular features. Okay, the wonderful Vincent Lebeau here giving some size perspective of the large linear mounds found at Marona. And as I mentioned, these go for 25 kilometres across the valley floor. Iroquois Plateau. I don't know, I hope that's it's quite clear, at least for those close up. This shows the Iroquois Plateau with extensive rectilinear grid mound features, the 30 centimetre high type, across much of the landscape. There are good historical records that support their interpretation as garden boundaries. Most gardens across the archipelago prior to European contact were fenced in and were in a square or rectangular configuration. Pigs roamed outside the fences. The late Barry Wakeman discussed both fencing and the rectilinear form of Vanuatu garden layout in detail, citing early contact records. For example, Captain Cook described the gardens on Pentecost that appeared to stretch from the coast up to the summit of the high hills of the interior as being divided into rectangular fields by fences. Similar descriptions of fences can also be found for Awhate. These low mounds, as seen in the LiDAR data, are like to have been created along the old fence lines where weeds, stones and other debris were heaped up. You'll also note on this image the large circular feature. The road, if you drive on the road to Erotat, you actually pass through that circular feature, so it gives you some size context. Back to our map of the circular features, highlighted by black. These things are truly spectacular, that nobody seemed to be aware of prior to the LiDAR data being made available, and appear to represent ceremonial sites close to population centres. 71 of these features have been identified. Okay, that's in 34% of the island has the LiDAR survey. 71 of these features. They have been created essentially by people shifting soil from the centre out towards the edge to a circular boundary, creating a circular mound at the edge. At least 30,000 cubic metres of soil is being shifted in the process. There is often a small mound left in the centre. Their sizes vary greatly, from the very large ones, which are 125 to 200 metres in diameter, to around 40 metres for the smaller ones. They are found at all altitudes, from 10 metres above sea level to 310 metres above sea level. And you see in the diagram the yellow coloured circular features are on that high altitude. They're 250 metres above sea level there on that strip joining the two large areas. The very few early historical records on Awhate talk of dancing grounds on Awhate, with up to 500 or 600 people being involved. The dancing grounds were circular with groups of drums in the centre, and these features may well be associated with such activity. Nobody locally again seems to be aware of the creation of these or the use of these monumental features, nor the networks of high linear mounds at Morona. A symptom we suggest is related to massive depopulation, displacement and loss of knowledge that occurred in the 19th century. And just to emphasise, this is the Error Mound. You can drive through it, that's the road cutting through it, providing some idea of the scale of these things. On the right is an image from the interior of the same, looking at people on the top of the circular mound to again provide some idea of scale. These things are truly monumental, so large in fact they are difficult to identify on the ground. In conclusion then, across the Pacific region there are increasing concerns about the sustainability and resilience of island economies, rapidly growing populations, public health, and the impacts of climate change. Associated with all these factors is future food security, which is indeed a major challenge. There is a general trend of increasing reliance on imported food and a general decline in traditional knowledge relating to gardening practices. There is an historical trend in Vanuatu since independence of increasing food imports and expanding commercial crops. However, while Pacific societies are grappling with these issues, the debates both inside and outside the respective countries are often completely devoid of historical depth or deeper understanding of traditional agro-systems. The direct archaeological evidence supplied by the LiDAR survey of extensive agricultural remains that once supported a much larger population on Awhate at contact highlights the crucial role of traditional agriculture into the future. The population in Vanuatu before European contact may well have been double of what that it is today, all sustained by traditional gardening, including surplus for ceremony, with certainly no importation of rice or flour. Many years ago now, 15 years ago, Ralph Regan-Vanu, in his plea to policymakers everywhere, that traditional economy of Melanesia and other parts of the Pacific should not be ignored when considering options for future development. He said we must shift our thinking to considering the traditional economy not as a problem to be solved, but rather as an enormous asset to be utilised. In that vein, I think that rather than thinking in terms of rebuilding Melanesia, which I think has sort of hints of making things great again, we should think in terms of reinforcing Melanesia and supporting traditional social and agricultural systems that have a 50,000-year heritage. Also, finally, a plea to those attached to institutions and governments to realise the real importance and extraordinary value of LiDAR coverage. It has the power to reveal whole landscapes transformed by human activity and their associated deep histories, not simply the very basic data for which it has been used, that of identifying which areas of the country might be affected by sea level rise. Archipelago-wide LiDAR coverage would be an astute investment for the country's future. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup et thank you très much. One on top of
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Stewart, for your wonderful presentation regarding the traditional gardening system as a way for resilience towards our future. Any question from the audience? Francis?
Thank you, Stuart. That was wonderful. Thanks, Stuart. No, I was just wondering if any of the people of AirCorps showed special interest in the boundaries, the historical boundaries that you unearthed through the LiDAR, or if they follow them still, or were they unknown to them?
Yeah, we haven't worked with the community. Well, I've talked to the communities about the features, and so I've visited the one Eracore on the road, and people have names for those areas, but they weren't really aware that this massive sort of monumental feature was there. They have names for them, sort of meeting place. So that's certainly something to be, focused on. But in terms of those circular features, I've canvassed everyone around the Whātei, and nobody is aware of how they were built, when were they built, what were they for, and are equally astounded as we were when we came across the LiDAR data that these things they're sitting in the, if you drive through them, they're so massive that if you're walking across it, you ride up over the top, you drop down, you walk for 80 metres, so you don't think about what you've already done, and then you rise up again. So you don't think this thing is a massive ceremonial structure. So people are aware that there's heaps there. Same with the Morona Valley. People are very aware that you climb up this bit of hill, and this area here is better for planting yam, and these other areas are better for planting other things. But they have no knowledge that they were built by their ancestors. Yeah. So that is certainly something that would be very valuable. So even just the naming of those areas, if we could get sort of GPS points, and that's something I've been working on at Eracore with Nick Teberger. So yeah.
Any more questions from the audience? No cut? Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Stewart, for your presentation. The next speaker for this afternoon is Mr. Kempson from Department of Foreign Affairs. He will be speaking on the International Climate Justice Vanuatu Advisory Opinion on Climate Change. So let's welcome Mr. Kempson on stage.
Bon après-midi à tous. Premièrement, je remercie le comité organisateur de cette symposium de m'avoir permettre d'être là pour faire une présentation sur l'initiative de Vanuatu concernant le changement climatique. Okay. Ma présentation est en anglais, donc je vais faire la présentation en anglais. Okay, thank you. So I'll do the presentation in English. Firstly, at the outset, I have to say that I'm not an expert in this area of climate change. But I work with the government of Vanuatu on this initiative as part of the secretariat. Secretariat that you can see the name, I put it up there. It's a Climate Diplomacy Secretariat, and we work directly with the task force that was established by the Vanuatu government on this, to try forward this initiative. So we'll move on. This is the content of my presentation. So I'll firstly talk about the initiative itself, the brief background, and the two-phase approach, the phase 1 and phase 2, and also I'll show you the extract of the resolution. It's the UN resolution, and the phase 2 is the legal proceedings that is currently ongoing, and also the implications of the advisory opinion. Also, I'll give a conclusion. So, I think most of you may have know the issue, may follow the issue on the media or internet. And maybe some of you, this is the first time. So my main objective here is to present the initiative so that every one of you will have a fair idea of what it is exactly. Okay, so this is the initiative. Vanuatu has led a coalition of 18 countries around the world to seek an advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on the obligations of states under international law to protect the rights of present and future generations against the adverse impacts of the climate change. So this is the initiative. The main objective is to get an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice is known as the World Court, and I think it has never been given an opportunity for him for ICJ to give its opinion on the case of climate change. Okay, so those 18 countries that work together with Vanuatu, they are strategic in the sense that they represent different geographical areas. So by this I mean that we have some of them from Europe, some from Africa and the Pacific, Caribbean. So they are representative of different geographical areas in the world. And those 18 countries, they are also important because, to get this, this case to ICJ, it needs to follow the UN process, which means that it has to be gone through the election or the voting at the UN General Assembly. So by having 18 countries, we work with them to socialize the initiative with the country, and also to work within the different platforms to reach to reach some consensus on the initiative so we can drive it forward. So I'll briefly talk about the background of this initiative, how it came about. In March 2019, a group of law students at the Malus campus here, USP, in the International Environmental Law course. The lecturer at the time asked them to do some brainstorming and some research on the most progressive climate change action that the Pacific Island leaders could initiate in the international legal process. So they brainstorm and then they come up with the idea. They have decided that it is worth seeking an advisory opinion of the ICJ on climate change, and they lobby, and then after this they would lobby the leaders to take it forward. So among the crowds, the audience this afternoon, I can see one of them. I recognize Solomon. Solomon here is. Can you lift your hand? Yes, Solomon is one of those students back then at USP here, and he's from the Solomon Islands. Okay, so I think those students have learned from a similar initiative that was taken by Palau, but which was not adopted due to strong political opposition at the United General Assembly. Okay. I think one initiative from Palau and maybe Marshall Islands. So once those students presented the initiative, the idea to the Vanuatu government, and the Vanuatu government endorsed the initiative, and then they take it forward through the forum leaders. If you know the Pacific Islands Forum, through the forum leaders. I remember back in 2019. They've the Vanuatu government presented this initiative to the leaders at the retreat, and then they know that the initiative by the Vanuatu government. So at the time, we don't really know how we will go about this issue, and back then, and then slowly we get to find ways how to take the initiative forward. Okay, in terms of the approach taken, I think it is guided by the UN process. So the first phase and the objective is to get the draft legal text and get it endorsed by the UN General Assembly. So this is the first aim. And the second one is the legal proceedings by ICJ, the International Court of Justice itself. So the first approach, I would say, it was started. It takes last year, as the 2022 and 2021, we have started this phase 1 process, and then at this moment we are going into the phase 2, the legal proceedings by ICJ. Okay, so I'll talk a bit about the phase 1. So, as mentioned, that we need to get the resolution, we need to get the UN resolution so that the case can be brought to ICJ. And it requires a lot of work with other countries, because to get this passed by the UNGA, you need a simple majority. So you have around 190 plus UN members, and you need to get the simple majority by, I would say, maybe 100, or somewhere around 100. Then you can get it, voted, so that it could be adopted as a resolution. So Vanuatu has led the coalition of 18 countries, and if you are interested, I can mention some of them. We have Antigua and Barbuda, Costa Rica, Sierra Leone, Angola, Germany, Mozambique, Liechtenstein, Samoa, Federal States of Micronesia, Bangladesh, Morocco, Singapore, Uganda, New Zealand, Vietnam, Romania, and Portugal. So these are the countries that work with Vanuatu. There's the core group. The core group that they use a lot of platforms to socialize the initiative and get the consensus. And also they work with the international legal firm. If you know, Blue Ocean Law is the main international legal firm that Vanuatu hires to work on this case, and then they work with it to draft the legal question. I would like to elaborate more on that part because it's not an easy task. There's a lot of controversies. There's a lot of opposition, and then you need to convince them about the initiative. And so there's a combination of political advocacies and diplomacy. And then there's a lot of movement from the civil society organizations that support. They put the pressure on the government to support the initiative. At the end, we know that climate change is the duty of everyone, all of us. So here is the extract of the resolution. So it's just the extract of that resolution. So the resolution itself is the text with legal questions that the country or the parties have asked to the ICJ. So you can see here is the extract, and then the coalition countries, they really taking into consideration all the international treaties or conventions or law that are there, and they build upon this to formulate the questions. So basically, you have two questions. The first one is what are the obligations of states? So it concerns the obligation of states under international law to ensure the protection of the climate system and other parts of the environment from anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases for states and for present and future generations. And the second question is, what are the legal consequences under these obligations for states where they, by their acts and omissions, have caused significant harm to the climate system and other parts of the environment with respect to, and then you have A and B. So there are two most important things here. Firstly is for ICJ to give its opinion on the obligation of states under the international law. And then the second one is the legal consequences of the legal consequences in terms of the fact that countries are not stand up to their obligations. Okay, so we'll move to we'll move on. In terms of the global support, as I've mentioned already, there are 132 countries by 29 March before the UNGA voting. There are 132 countries that indicate the co-sponsorship of the resolution. That means that they support the resolution. And we also have a lot of intergovernmental organization support. So, in order to get this, case forward, or this initiative forward, Vanuatu brought it to the Pacific Islands Forum. It's an intergovernmental organization, to socialize it with them and get a consensus and have endorsement. And then other intergovernmental organizations like CARICOM, Caribbean Community, and OACPS, it's like African Pacific countries, states organization. And then there are around 1,500 civil society organizations from 130 countries that support the initiative. There are a lot of NGOs that support, and also the students. So the civil society organizations, the students, all of them, they keep also key players in this initiative because they socialize it within the country, and also they put pressure on the government to support. Okay, we'll move on to phase 2, the legal proceedings. So, 29 March this year, the UN adopted the resolution by consensus. That means that there was no voting at the time. Everyone is agree with the resolution, and then everyone they vote for it, they accept it, to bring the case to the ICJ. And after this, on April 2023, this year, the ICJ received the case, the resolution from UNGA, and then they fixed 20 October 2023 as a deadline for written statements on the question. So written statements can be made by countries, all the countries, and also organizations, like international organizations. For instance, Pacific Islands Forum is an intergovernmental organization. They can make a submission. OECPS, CARICOM, they all can make a submission. ICJ also fixed the 22 January 2024 as the deadline to submit written comments on the written statements made by other states or organizations. So, if a country submit a written statement, then other countries can comment on that statement. So, if any country wants to provide its comment, then it can do it before 22 January 2024. As yesterday and 3 days this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is the day to commence the second phase 2 of the legal proceedings, and also to make sure that every country know what exactly they need to do in this second phase. Through SPC, we have organized a workshop in Nandi, and the main purpose of the workshop is to be strategic on how we can work on our submission to ICJ. And the other thing is that when I say strategic is that we coordinate. It's a lot of we coordinate on how we can do the submission, especially in the Pacific, so that not every country can do the submission on the same issue or same aspect of the impact of climate change. But we can talk about different issues rather than, yes. And I think the similar approach will be, the Vanuatu government will also do it with other intergovernmental organizations like CARICOM, OECPS, and others, to make sure they do the submission. Okay, I have to inform you also that on the 24th July this month, we have Vanuatu and the ICJ Go Group made a request to ICJ Registrar for 3-month extension, which is not yet approved, given the short time frame. So we want more time. So this request has been made to ICJ, and we're still waiting for their response. Okay, you may want to know about the ICJ advisory opinion and its implications. Firstly, I have to firstly, it's not. I mean, the opinions from ICJ are not legally binding. That means, those opinions are not an obligation for any particular country to abide by them or do them. Okay, so it's just an opinion, but it has it has a great legal weight and also moral authority. Because once the ICJ issued an opinion, then all the countries will look to you. Like if you're a country, they look to you. What are you doing? Like what is your act? And the second point here is that an advisory opinion of ICJ on this case will clarify and concretize the legal obligations of states to prevent and redress the adverse effects of climate change. There's a lot of discussion on the climate change impacts and the issues and responsibility of states, even under Paris Agreement and other conventions. But I think all the countries felt that there's still need for concrete action by each country. Another thing here is an advisory opinion could foster ambition in the pledges made by states under the Paris Agreement. So we have national determined contributions that each country has to make under the Paris Agreement. But we've seen that I think many countries, they're not really serious about this. ICJ advisory opinion would be the possibility of influencing other courts and domestic litigation. That means domestic court or any court can refer to the decision or the opinion of the ICJ in the legal proceedings. It could present an opportunity to obtain an authoritative statement on the long neglected matter of loss and damage. So we know that under UNFCCC, there's a lot of discussion about the loss and damage facility. Though they've agreed in 27 COP for last year on the finance for loss and damage, but they still work on the policies and the modality to establish it. It could the last point here is it could influence the ongoing international climate negotiations. So there's still ongoing climate negotiations. So this advisory opinion may help, can provide guidance to ongoing negotiations. Okay, so with this we'll come to the conclusion. I'm proud to say that this initiative is no longer a Vanuatu's initiative, but it's a global initiative. It's a Pacific initiative. It's the Caribbean initiative. It's a global initiative. It's no longer Vanuatu because without support from all these countries, we can't go that far. The second point is that it was an historic landmark resolution by UNGA. And the ICJ decision will also be a landmark advice that could be used by courts and all legal proceedings around the world. Why I'm saying it's a landmark resolution? Because, and for this, for this similar case, it's the first time that UNGA unanimously and by consensus adopted it to be taken to ICJ. The third point is that the success of ICJ initiative is a testament to the fact that a tiny nation like Vanuatu under international law can change the course of history. So I think we are all cross the fingers and wait for ICJ opinion, but it can be a very historical advice from ICJ that would change the course of history in this respect of climate change. What I can request from all of you right now is if you can pursue your government or your organization to make a written submission or be part of the legal proceedings. So you can request the government or help in any other way to pursue your government to make a written submission on the initiative. ICJ is not only the only, it's not the only initiative that the Vanuatu government pursue in terms of climate change. There are other initiatives, and one of them that is coming up right now is the Fossil Fuel Non-Prohibition Treaty, and there are also others. I think I'll touch a bit on that. On March, after the twin cyclone that hit Vanuatu, we had organized a meeting. 6 countries of the Pacific came together at Uriki to discuss this issue of Fossil Fuel Non-Prohibition Treaty, and then they've come up with a statement which is known as Port Filler Call of Action. It's available on the website. You can search for it. And 6 countries already have accepted, have endorsed it, and we also work with other countries to progress it forward. Well, if you want to get more information, I put up the website. You can go to that website. You'll see all the information. And also, if you have a query or any questions, you can send it to the Vanuatu ICJ@gmail.com. I think that's all for my presentation. If there's any question, I can ask, but I have to admit it to you that I work with the group, but they are not all in the country right now. They are in Fiji for the right job that I've mentioned. So, but if there's any question, if there's any question that you have, if I'm not able to give you an answer, you can still send an email to us through the email that I provided here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kempson, for your wonderful presentation regarding the processes towards the ICJ. So, any questions from the audience to Mr. Kempson regarding this? Thank you, Mr. Solomon, too, for being here, present. Maybe you can ask some questions to Mr. Solomon. I think he's
Yes,
one of the focal men of the group.
we also Sandy is here. If you need any scientific explanation on climate issues, then I think he can respond to that.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and I really applaud the collective effort that you and the other Pacific Islands youths have done in pushing this forward. And also I would like to applaud the government of Vanuatu for standing alongside you and the other youths in your pursuit for justice. My question is, you're putting out a call for us to convince our governments. Now, we understand the diversity in the Pacific as well as the competing priorities of governments. Is there a process, a consistent process that can be put forward to each of the Pacific Island governments, because it's obvious that not all of them are on board? But is there a consistent process from the group that we can present to the governments so that collectively they can come on board, or a process?
Okay, thank you for the question. Firstly, I think some of us know that the leaders of the Pacific through the Pacific Islands Forum, they've announced that climate change is the single greatest threat to the people of the Pacific. And then even at the national level, especially for Vanuatu, it's our position that Vanuatu is the single greatest threat to Vanuatu is the climate change. The first phase of this initiative is that we were given the endorsement by the leaders of the Pacific. I think maybe no other free country in the Pacific are member of the Pacific Islands Forum, but I think majority of them, there are 18 of them, are member of the forum, and they have collectively endorsed this. And the ride shop that was organized by SPC this week brings together all the Attorney Generals of all the countries of the Pacific, including the member of Secretariat of BIF. This initiative is no longer our initiative, but it's the regional initiative. So we'll have more ride shop based on the outcome of the one we had this week. They've organized more ride shop that we'll have. And also we have, the Vanuatu government has employed legal experts that will support any country in the Pacific with their submission. So we'll have legal experts here in Vanuatu and also at the PIP Secretariat that will support. So, and then the other thing is we work really with the SPC and probably other regional changes like SPREP on this case. Thank you.
Any more question for Mr. Kempson? No cut? Okay, so thank you, Mr. Kempson, for your presentation. Now, the next presentation will be by Dr. Tammy Tape and Foley. The presentation will be on the dialogue on climate displacement and resettlement in Melanesia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Namblong Foley, Mistaplo Vanuatu Formanis for lawmaking research. I come from the United States. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Hawaii, and I'm here with my friend and colleague Tammy. And it's really nice to be up here with Tammy instead of just by myself. I'm going to read a little bit of my comments, and then I'll hand the microphone over to Tammy to continue our discussion today. To start, I'd also like to thank the people of Vanuatu and the government for their generous hosting of MathFest, as well as all the people who made the broader celebration and this symposium possible. In my time today, I'd like to propose that Vanuatu is developing a distinctly Melanesian way forward, as the Honourable Minister Ralph Regenvanu articulated at the opening, but specifically in addressing displacement. Quickly, at the start, I'd like to outline a few key features of this approach, and then I'll hand the mic over to Tammy to expand our discussion to Melanesia more broadly. First, I commend the government of Vanuatu and the Ministry of Climate Change on the Vanuatu National Policy on Climate Change and Disaster-Induced Displacement. This policy provides a progressive framework for addressing displacement caused not only by climate change or also by fast onset disasters such as cyclones or volcanic eruptions, but also the slow onset disasters of climate change, environmental depletion, land conflict, and development-induced displacement. As such disasters are understood not only as natural, cyclones, for example, but can also be man-made or policy-related. In a way, this policy provides scholars with an opportunity to explore how disasters themselves are unfolding and may have histories, which can be studied to inform and create more just futures. This broad definition enables the consideration of a wide variety of pressures which lead people to move, sometimes preemptively and by choice, such as moving from Tana here to Port Vila, while also acknowledging that sometimes people are required to move, such as in the mandatory evacuation of Ambai in 2017 and 2018. The policy also, quote, recognizes that planned relocation is an option of last resort, end quote, and that, quote, land is a critical consideration relevant to understanding and resolving displacement challenges in Vanuatu, end quote. As the writer, First Minister for Lands and statesman Pastor Sethi Reganvanu, who we had the luck of hearing from yesterday, has written, quote, land to Ni Vanuatu is what a mother is to a baby. It is with the land that he defines his identity, and it is with the land that he maintains his spiritual strength. End quote. Land is at the heart of Melanesian governance, as the panel this morning discussed. Land is also at the heart of discussions around displacement, because land lost must be found anew. Unfortunately, Maui has not been pulling new islands out of the sea lately. But also, as we have heard throughout this festival, a person's identity, custom, and place is tied to their land. And yet, as the great seafarers who first came to Vanuatu and created resilient gardens, as Stuart mentioned earlier, communities have long found ways to move when the need arose. Custom has provided mechanisms for new members to join communities and access land for gardening and living on a limited basis. Well known in Vanuatu is the relocation of community from Ambrim to today's Melemat. This is one example of displacement. Many families today have brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, mothers, fathers currently abroad working on RSE, which is also a form of displacement. Both these examples, of course, pose challenges to families, to custom and land, as well as provide different opportunities. I mention these examples to align with the Vanuatu strategy, which encourages us to think broadly about displacement, to not be limited to thinking only of climate refugees or of rising seas, which often make the news in Western countries, but to a wide variety of contexts in which people move, and also the absolute importance of thinking about how to ensure dignity and respect as people move. I'd like to now reference more specifically one case of displacement to draw out some of the complexities of aligning custom and displacement government policy. On Ambai, the active volcano led to 2 compulsory evacuations of about 11,000 people who called the island home, first in September 2017 and then again in July 2018. This was very challenging for communities. Amidst this mass displacement, government, chiefs, community leaders, nonprofits highlighted new types of policies for resettlement. Importantly, the evacuation itself and the resettlement policies which followed were contested at the time and continue to be, as you can read in the Vanuatu Daily Post and on Facebook. Differences of opinions emerged on whether to focus on resettlement on Maiwo or on Santo, to create a large resettlement site, or to prioritize more intimate family-by-family Casper reunions. Amidst this disagreement, far and above, the concept evoked most frequently in the news was the importance of custom in guiding resettlement policy. For example, one leader from West Ambai was quoted as saying, in West Ambai, when a father leaves his daughter at the home of her new husband, he foretells that one day perhaps her home will be our place for water, sleep, or safety when her family runs from disaster. Today, the people of Santos stand in the place of our daughters to provide us with a place of refuge during our time of trouble. End quote. The Vanuatu displacement strategy specifically notes the importance of custom, outlining a number of actions, such as number 6.4, which is to explore land acquisition options in consultation with custom landowners and Malwatamori leaders. But custom, as we've discussed throughout the past 2 days and the weeks before, extends beyond the rules and norms for managing relations to land, although of course this is essential. This depth of knowledge is noted also in the policy in Action 11.5, which proposes to showcase traditional knowledge, including stories of migration. MacFest and this symposium, I think, have shown the vast fields of knowledge held in custom, from custom arts, as we learned about yesterday, to tattoo, to sand drawing, to storytelling. Referring back to Ambai, custom stories provided a valuable pathway to situate the disaster and to make resettlement more possible, and to articulate different visions of resettlement. Custom, perhaps, can provide more powerful contributions to displacement policy than currently imagined, perhaps broadening the role of custom and reshaping the role of government. Custom stories such as Tagaro and his upturned canoe open up a space for finding common relations and genealogies between people of different islands. Custom governance determines how people can access and maintain land as well as resolve conflict. This festival is a welcome reminder of the many ways in which the islands and peoples in Melanesia are connected and have shared genealogies, which, as you might guess, I don't claim a part of. Not just in Vanuatu from Torres to Tana, but reaching out across the ocean from South Sea Islanders in Australia to West Papua to Papua New Guinea, Kanaki, Solomons, and Fiji. As we have the immense privilege of having writers, scholars, artists, politicians, and custom knowledge holders here together in this room, we're hoping that we might use this session as an opportunity to open up a space to story on displacement and the relationship between government, custom, and movement. So at the end here, I will raise a question and pass the microphone over to Tammy. And so my question is, how can and has custom guided resettlement? How should the government, which has the responsibility of protecting and delivering essential services to its people, work with and within custom, or should custom work beyond it?
All right, thank you so much, Foley. I know it's 3, almost 4. It's a time of the day we start winding down, and we're bringing to you a really critical topic, so I hope that you can be patient with us. So in exploring the concept of displacement and resettlement, it's a new discussion, particularly in this Melanesian space. But before I start, I'm going to introduce myself because I think my brother here mentioned another colleague of ours that we work together in Fiji. So my name is Tammy. I am from the Solomon Islands, but I come from many places. I've lived in many places, and each of these places I embody the values, the custom, but also I carry on with me identities from this place. So I'm pretty much a floating coconut, if you like it, but I know that Solomon Islands is home. And I think grounding myself in Solomon Islands as home makes me want to raise this question about the difference between what is land, what is place, and what is home. And so for me, everywhere I live is a home for me. But Place Blomi, Minosabe. I have to trace that through my grandparents. So I'm also a product of a displaced and resettled community that ended up in the Solomon Islands. So a lot of my work and stories have really informed a lot of the processes of developing resettlement policies across the Pacific. And a lot of the stories do inform national and regional policies, but not specifically country or community ways of movement. And so I'm coming to you this afternoon from a policy space, and I'm reaching out to ask, what are your perceptions and thoughts about how people move and the different concepts that we use in policies when it comes to moving of people from one place to another as a result of climate change or natural disaster. And so I'm going to take us back to the relevance of custom and state-led processes of resettlement. Now, at the policy level, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and specifically Fiji has taken leadership in developing and launching their resettlement displacement policies. Now that's at the national level. We're currently working on the regional framework for climate migration and displacement, but it's a very complex process because who gets to be part of the conversation and who does not get to be part of the conversation. And particularly in the Melanesian space where land is such a complex topic, where we all see land, lived on land, use land, pass on land differently, is such a complex topic of discussion. But I think it's a critical topic that we should start talking about. And so I want to go back to what Foley raised about the custom or local ways of moving and the state-led processes of resettlement. And if there's room for conversion, how do we integrate the state-led processes of resettlement into the way people are moving customarily based on the different places that they come from? And I think this is the challenge, because while national policies are being developed and implemented, there is still that gap between the communities who are going to be affected, who have been affected by climate change impacts and may need to move, but they have different ways of movement. And I think my question that I wanted to raise is moving a community or moving a group of households from one place to another due to climate change impacts and natural disaster considered resettlement in your own context? Or is there another concept that really describes the relationship, but also the embodiment of every living element within that particular land that also move as you move? And so I want to throw it back to the audience, that custom is really important and people move in different ways. The way we're seeing it is community relocation, a community resettlement. But how is it done in Vanuatu? How is it done in Tana? How is it done in New Caledonia? How is it done in the Solomon Islands and in Fiji? Is resettlement process the right way to go about this? Or are there ways in which custom is the basis of this movement that have been practiced over the years, but not often articulated or attributed towards policies? So I'm going to stop there. And if you have any question, please let us know and we'll do our best.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tammy and Foley, for your presentation regarding resettlement in Melanesia with regards to climate change. I think it's a very big issue for Vanuatu, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia. I understand in one of the villages in the outskirts of Portvilla, they're thinking of relocating their village. This will be the second relocation. They were on the Lepa Island, then they relocate to Mangaliliu, still in the customary boundary. And then they will make second relocation to another place, still within their customary boundary. So it's a big challenge for all the people in the Melanesia regarding the resettlement with regards to climate change. So, any question from the audience to Dr. Tami and Folly?
Thank you. I have thank you, Folly. Thank you, Tammy. So my question is has a question, and it also has a comment. In Vanuatu, I believe we move with our custom. We move with carrying our practices and our norms with us from place to place. And moving is not a new activity in Vanuatu. We have moved based on natural disaster, because of natural disaster, many years ago. And our customary leaders and people in our rural areas and everywhere, they are familiar with the arrangement that has been practiced and established over time. And land alienation has been given to people, and there's arrangements. However, I'd like to say the last 15 or 20 years, things have not been really clear as to the perpetual ownership of, or the rights to occupy that land, because we have concepts of now perpetual ownerships. We register the land, we register custom land, we rule boundaries, we talk about boundaries. Boundaries is a new concept. We don't talk about boundaries before. And so I'd like to say my recommendation to the government, if we're coming from a policy perspective, if we want to address the existing gaps, if we want to create new policies, and we want to patch up the gaps in terms of displacement or people moving from one place to another, removing people, relocating people due to natural disaster, we have to take into consideration the existing law, the decision that has been decided by the Supreme Court and the Appeal Court on the rights, occupation rights, a right to possession of a land from customary owners of different lands here in Vanuatu. And I think it's the same for Papua New Guinea as well as Solomon Islands. But I cannot speak for these two countries. But in our constitution, Vanuatu constitution, custom is recognized as law. But again, when we define custom and we interpret custom, there's no limit to it. We can define this is custom practice, this is not custom practice. And it may become law, it may not become law. So we have to take into consideration what the court has decided that this is custom practice. If a chief has given a land to some people due to volcano or something, a natural disaster, and now they have perpetual right to that area, that they can pass it on down or inherit it from the generation down, then we have to take that into consideration when we're drafting policies. Because, or we will make new laws to remove those rights that the court has already placed. That's all, thank you.
I just want to say thank you very much for your sort of legal contributions, Margaret Joyce. I think you made very good points, and I'm really grateful to you for sharing those today.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much for that. There's different aspects to which resettlement and displacement can be viewed, and it's a very unique, chaotic entanglement that only us people that, like custodians of the customs and land, can actually talk about and unravel. But, you know, solutions always spring forth from this chaos. Sometimes beautiful, other times not so beautiful. But thank you for bringing that legal aspect as well towards custom. And I think, looking from the policy perspective, there's also that fear of when does custom stop becoming custom, or when does the strength of that custom being implemented or imposed to the community that has moved from one land to another weathers off. And then you need something else to either ensure its continuity or you bring in the legal law. And so those kinds of complexity are in discussion, but at the policy space, a lot of the local community representatives as well as leaders are often absent. And a lot of these things are not often talked about in the policy space because that's not where it's supposed to be talked about. And so there's a lot of gaps that still needs to be addressed. Here.
Any more questions for Tammy and Foley? Yep.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering, it sounds like the policies tend to look forward, as in relocating displacement, but what policies cover what they're leaving? So if somebody is displaced or resettled due to volcanoes, is there policy that covers them coming back to their lands, or once they have been resettled in new lands, what happens to, I guess, access rights, resource management in the lands that they've left? Would there be policies that actually cover some of that as well?
So far, a lot of the focus has just been on resettlement and displacement, and I know Fiji, that's one of the key questions that came up during the development of the standard operating procedures for the planned relocation guidelines, is that once we move from this place, can we come back or will it be preserved for our own use? And then because we're speaking of the future, we're not certain what exactly is going to happen, particularly when there is a peak in development as well. And so there's that fear that when people move, their land might be offered for other development activities. And so they're trying to include that policy that either that land is completely preserved for the use of that community, and if collectively they agree to use it for other purposes, it has to be a collective decisions and recognized within the policy.
I just add too that it's my understanding that the recovery process that was envisioned after the Ambai volcanic eruption was to facilitate communities to be able to return home. So the policy was never meant to be perpetual in the sense of permanently severing people's connection to their home island. And I think that that's a core issue in resettlement, is the connection to land is very, very strong, and that makes it hard to talk about moving because people don't want to leave their homes, and who would? So I think that that's sort of one of the central pains in resettlement dialogue. And then I just also add on sort of a macro scale, this is something that Pacific leaders have been quite concerned about in regards to sea level rise. So if sea level rise changes national boundaries, what would happen to like EEZs, for example? So I think on a micro and a macro scale, this question is really important. And as far as I understand, the UN has affirmed that the boundaries of today will remain in future, even if sea level rise changes the location of islands. But I think that that's a continued fight that Pacific leaders are making at the UN to safeguard their resources for future generations and also safeguard their lands and territories and oceans.
Okay, last question before afternoon tea.
Merci beaucoup pour vos interventions. Je viens de Kanaki, Nouvelle-Calédonie. J'ai écouté avec beaucoup d'attention vos pour votre intervention. Avec celui de monsieur auparavant, comme ça, le changement aussi climatique. Et d'accord, ok. Je vais être simple en fait. Votre sujet en fait nous interpelle aussi en Nouvelle-Calédonie.
We feel very concerned by the topic because we're from New Caledonia and it really touches us as well.
Par rapport à la coutume et les déplacements de population.
In terms of customs and resettlement.
Je vois ici que chez les pays frères Vanuatu, ils ont été déplacés par le volcan.
I can see that here in Vanuatu, my Vanuatu brothers have been displaced by the volcanoes.
Nous, en Nouvelle-Calédonie, en 2016, dans ma région, on a subi un éboulement de terre et j'ai perdu 4 de ma famille dedans et 9 en tout dans ma commune, dans mon village.
In my village in New Caledonia, we had landslides in 2016, and I lost 9 members of my family during the landslides.
Donc, je comprends la problématique du foncier que vous dites. C'est quelque chose, un sujet important.
So what you're talking about is rather important to us.
Mais en résumé, je vais dire modestement que l'heure n'est plus aux paroles, puisque plusieurs conférences ont été faites sur le changement climatique, mais il faut apporter modestement des actions. Merci.
I don't think it's time anymore for words or talking now. We've had many summits on climatic changes. I think we should have action now.
C'est juste ce que je voulais dire, que je vous comprends quand vous dites que le problème est politique. Merci beaucoup pour votre intervention.
I understand what you mean when you say it's actually a political issue. Thank you very much for mentioning all this.
Okay, so I think we should break for afternoon tea because we are running short of time. So if you have any question for Dr. Tami and Foley, ask them during the tea break. And then we'll have afternoon tea for 15 minutes and then we come back for the last session for today. Thank you.